Hello and welcome to another episode of Into the Afroverse with your host, William Jones. And Into the Afroverse is where we're taking Black folks into the future. We talk about Afrofuturism and we concern ourselves with the future of Black people, not only in the United States, but around the world. Oftentimes, as I've said many times on the show, people will talk about it in the context of creativity, whether it's literacy, art, dance, performative arts. But here at Into the Afroverse, we like to look at the history of Black folks in its totality. And I believe that Afrofuturism touches on all areas. And today's guest, we're actually going to be looking at the future of language, the future of language literacy. And today we are joined by two guests. First, we have April Broussard. April is currently a Spanish language teacher in New York City. She's a native of Texas with Louisiana roots and has always been fascinated by how people use words to communicate, all while knowing the majority of human communication is nonverbal. She's a proud alumna of Spelman College, and she enjoys dancing and reading books and people in her spare time. And joining her, we have Dr. Rhashida Hilliard. Dr. Hilliard is born and raised and has been called the multilingual apple. Rhashida is currently a teacher of Spanish at a middle school in the Bronx. She has also taught Spanish and English to speakers of other languages in high schools and not-for-profit organizations around New York City. She's a true lover of language and language learning. She lives by the Nelson Mandela quote, "If you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. If you talk to him in his own language, that goes to his heart." When not speaking or attempting to speak to people in their own language, she enjoys spending time with her family and friends, reading, watching movies, and running things. And with that, I would like to welcome both April and Dr. Hilliard to Into the Afroverse. How you ladies doing today?
Doing well, thank you.
Same, thank you. Well, doing very well.
Excellent, excellent. So once again, I would like to thank you for taking time to join us here at Into the Afroverse. And can you, just to kind of kickstart things, if you could both speak to what got you involved in learning other languages, what do you find so fascinating about it? And we can start with you, April.
Okay, sure. So I am from Southeast Texas, and I always have to, name that wherever I go, because that's where my language learning started. The way that I speak English, right? The way that I pronounce my words, it's influenced by me being in South Texas, but also being so close to Louisiana. And because I'm a quiet person, I'm an introvert, I do listen, right? And I observe. So just listening to how people say their words, put things together, that has always fascinated me. As far as being a Spanish language learner and teacher, because I was in Texas, Spanish was all around, right? And I saw the benefits of knowing it, being able to communicate with friends, like when we had sleepovers, could go over to her house and talk to her parents, and that was fun, and they would practice with us. So language for me has been a way to connect with my family, and also to connect with my friends. I make it a point to not lose my accent when I go home, to make sure that my elders can understand me, but more importantly, that I continue to speak the language that they speak.
Gotcha. What about you, Dr. Hilliard? What got you in the language?
Well, let's see. When I and you can call me Rhashida, that's fine as well. When I was in middle school in Bronx, New York, I remember that I'll just say the top classes, there was always one top class. And so that class had to take French. And so that's how I started getting into language. However, growing up in New York, I was surrounded by Spanish speakers. So on the one hand, I enjoyed learning French. And I had one of my older sisters actually did like an exchange program. So she went to France. And then the person, I guess she must have stayed with this family. It was long ago. So that person came to stay with us. Then she did another study abroad to Russia. I think it was the Soviet Union at that time. And
Right.
that someone from there came to stay with us. And so I was always fascinated with trying to learn to communicate with people in the language that they spoke. So since I was taking French at the time, I was able to communicate with the person from France. However, I wasn't really able to communicate with the person from Russia. I wasn't really
Right.
learning Russian. But eventually, I was just like, okay, I still enjoy languages. So I decided, well, I live around a lot of Spanish speakers. So I decided that I was going to take Spanish as well. So
Mhm.
once I got to, I want to say like my senior year of high school, I started taking Spanish while taking French, since I was at the end of the French like courses. And then when I got into college, I switched to Spanish and I started
Right.
taking Italian as well. So I was doing Spanish and Italian. And eventually I just was like, whatever languages are offered, I would like to take. So on my own, I ended up studying Arabic as well.
Wow.
And and currently I'm studying Zulu. So I just in general love to learn languages, and I'm interested and fascinated in how people actually do acquire languages. I know there are these theories that when a baby is born, they can actually learn to speak 3,000 different languages, but once whatever language the parent speaks is what they start internalizing.
Right.
So I guess I always consider myself a baby when it comes to learning the language.
No, that's awesome. That's a great way of describing
so, so
it.
I would like to learn 3,000 languages, but
Right.
but yeah, I just enjoy learning languages, being able to communicate with people
Excellent.
wherever I go. So I'm sure I could say more, but yeah, I
Excellent.
just enjoy learning.
And what is it that brought you two together? And what work are you doing when it comes to languages? What is it that you are focusing your attention on specifically? April, what was it that brought you two together?
The job. So we worked together at a school in New York City. So we were both Spanish language teachers. We worked together, and I think for me seeing another Black woman being a Spanish teacher, which is how my formal training started, right? My first Spanish language teacher was a Black Panamanian woman. So I saw myself immediately. I knew I could do it. I knew I could be successful. So then I guess the full circle moment is now in my professional life. My coworker was another Black woman teaching Spanish, and she was excellent, right? I have super high standards. Some people might say I push myself to the limits, and I'm like, oh wow, this person is actually better than me. Like I want to connect, I want to plan, I want to, dream, do all the things possible. So it started with us working together. I wouldn't say that our personalities are similar, but I would say that we believe similar things, right? So that's always helpful when you have a radical idea and you look to your left or to your right, and that person is nodding like, yep, let's do it.
Right.
So yeah, short story is we started by working together.
And what is it that you guys focus on in addition to, you know, teaching and so forth? In terms of research, what is it that you're actively pursuing and researching? And I can leave that open to either one of you.
Rhashida, you want to take that one?
Sure. So first of all, thank you. I feel honored to be a part of this, and sometimes it's always interesting to hear how people view you.
Right.
So thank you, April, for that. In terms of our research and what we do, as April was speaking, it made me think about what I was saying about the quote. I try to speak in the language that the person speaks so it can go to their heart. And April mentioned, us having similar thoughts in terms of how we want to teach, even though we don't have the same personality. So in terms of the language that we speak, if it's about empowerment, I feel like that's a language that April spoke when I met her. And so interestingly, in terms of the workshops that we do, it wasn't when we were working together that we did these workshops. It was after I left that job. I don't know how we came to do this, but I want to say I started in like 2018, maybe
Okay.
2017, 2018. It might have been 2018. We decided to do this workshop in Louisiana. It turns out that one of the language conferences was going to be in Louisiana, and I know Avery has Louisiana roots. And so I was like, this would be really cool if we actually did a workshop in Louisiana. And it was on intentional representation in the world language classroom.
Mhm.
One of the things that we talk about is that although we are teaching the language, these are words, a lot of what's accompanied by these words are imagery, and even the words that are used. So we had a conversation about, we went to, just like April was saying, her language teachers were Black Spanish speakers. We don't always see that representation in our textbooks, and if we do, sometimes it's not in an empowering way. So our first workshop was a focus on intentional representation in the world languages classrooms. And we do focus on race. At the same time, we also were focusing on other forms of representation that we don't necessarily see, but that's kind of how we got started. We were like, okay, let's focus on this intentional representation in the world languages classroom.
Excellent. And if you're just joining us, this is Into the Afroverse with your host, William Jones. And Into the Afroverse, we're taking Black folks into the future. And we are joined today by two linguists, April Broussard and Rhashida Hilliard. So you were talking about your workshop, intentional representation. What does that mean? And in the context of the phrase itself and also your workshop, what exactly is that about? And once again, I'll leave that open. I don't want
to. So intentional representation for us, when we were doing this workshop is, well, we obviously had a discussion. Basically, especially since we're focusing on Afrofuturism, one of the things that we noticed is that when we talk about language learning, and let's just focus on Spanish right now because we're both Spanish teachers, a lot of the times we are not presented with imagery of how Spanish speakers can look. Like that's the first thing.
Right.
So sometimes we'll have students who, Black students, for example, who might think, I can't learn that language, I'm Black. Or maybe they'll look at you and say, how do you know how to speak Spanish? And if I go back to the original quote of, they say that all babies can learn language. Sometimes I feel like the students think if you're Black, for example, there's no way that you can learn how to speak a language, or there's no way that you speak this language if it's not your native language.
Right.
So that was like one of the first things like that came to mind in terms of being intentional when we try to show who can learn languages. I mean, it's open to everyone, but I feel like some segments of the population feel like they're sort of exempt because how can I be a Spanish speaker or a French speaker if I'm not a native speaker of that language?
Right. And to add on to that, I was just going to say that for me, I know that system of oppression are by design. So I also have to try to dismantle by design, right? So when we're talking about intentional representation, my first thought is visually, like, what do you see? Do you see yourself? I know personally, in any space, I look for myself first. And however I identify, like all of my identifiers, at least one of them needs to be there. Or I'm like, yeah, no, this is not for me. Right. So this idea of, is this Spanish language for me? Yeah, it's for you. One, because like there you are. I want to show multiple ways that you can be a part of it because you're already a part of it. Right. So I think that intentionality is like, who's in the room? All right. That's your mirror, like you see yourself, but also I want you to see others, right? So it's for my Black students to see themselves. It's for my non-Black students to also see dark-skinned people speaking Spanish.
Yeah, because, and this is an ongoing conversation, and we're seeing more and more of this conversation, thankfully. When people think of Spanish-speaking countries, Spanish-speaking people, most often when they're represented on television, movies, magazines, and so forth, you don't see Black people. So it kind of alienates the student long before you guys even encounter them. And once you do, it's like you said, your authenticity is questioned, your background is questioned. How are you able to overcome this with students? And this is something that I think educators in all areas face, especially Black educators in all areas face. But for language in particular, how are you able to overcome that to where students can trust you and say, oh, I can do this, and you guys are qualified to teach us? April?
Wow, that's a big one. I think it takes a little bit of time and relationship building, right? That's just like teacher-student relationship. But all of my examples are Black. And they don't lose because of that, right? So I try to think of what might the counter argument be. They don't lose because of that, because in the outside world, every other example is somebody who's not Black. So if I want a professional, if I want an athlete, if I want an author, any type of person that speaks Spanish, a farmer, local person down the street, anyone, that person is going to be Black. The books that are on my bookshelf, people with dark skin. And you're not losing anything because of this. You're actually learning and gaining. So students are like, oh, it's not just an agenda. Like, no, this is real life. This is the world, right? When you go to this place, you will see these people. I want you to be able to communicate with them. I want them to be able to communicate with you. So it's just showing them, like, it's not just one example, right? Multiple examples.
And Rhashida, what's been your experience in getting students to overcome this feeling of they can't learn it, and at the same time, trusting your scholarship and trusting your education?
Well, one of the things is, for me, is being honest about who you are. It's not to say that you have to divulge all of this information to students. Like, sometimes I think there's this conception or misconception that you have to give students all of this information for them to trust you. Like, they need to know where you live, how old you are, who you hang out with. I don't mean like that. You don't have to be friends, so to speak, with your students, but you can be honest. So, for example, as teachers, yes, we definitely need to be experts in our field. But sometimes I think they don't understand that we're also human beings. So even showing that you can make a little mistake, and I'm not saying always like get things wrong all of the time. That's a different conversation. If every day you're like, oh, I don't know how to conjugate a verb. But sometimes allowing them to see you make a slight mistake. For example, I'll just speak and give like a little scenario.
Sure.
Sometimes when and I know April can, attest to this. But sometimes when we're teaching, we try to introduce different ways to say things. Like, this is how things might be said in the Caribbean in Spanish. This is how it might be said in Argentina. And the students also know, like, I'm from here, New York. They'll still try to ask, like, where's your great grandparents from? Where your, and I'll tell them I'm from here. But I also show them that there are different ways you can say things, and I learned these things.
Right.
Not like I woke up. I didn't wake up like this, I did learn these things, and you can learn them too. So when they see that you're also a human being and that you learn as well, and that, no, you're not just born with all of this information, and you actually show them that you actually learn things, like, well, guess what? I used to say this, and then yesterday I learned this new word.
Right.
They're like, oh, okay. So you are human and you can learn. And I think that's how it is, because I think sometimes they do automatically think, especially, I don't know how it is for all teachers, but I do think that sometimes they kind of question, like, when, let's say they ask you something, well, how come it's said like this in Argentina? because they really want to know, are you Argentinian to know that? And
Gotcha.
my response is, well, I mean, I read and I learned that, and you can too. And
Right.
then I think eventually they start to see like, oh, okay, we can learn. You did learn it, and it's possible. So
Excellent.
if that even makes sense.
No, it certainly does. And we are joined by April Broussard and Rhashida Hilliard here on Into the Afroverse. We're taking Black folks into the future. My question is, what are the benefits of learning another language, and what is lost, in your opinions, if a young person, or an adult for that matter, hasn't learned another language? What is missing? Because when we talk about Black students in particular, I don't know what the numbers are. I'm just going off of anecdotal evidence in my experience. Outside of Black people being from other countries, many times the ones that are born here don't pick up another language. What do you believe, or what do you know is being lost when a student doesn't do that? Or what is it that they gain when they do acquire a second language or a third language? April.
Right. So the first thing I thought of was brain science and the brain research, right? About how the benefits of knowing multiple languages, even, carrying that into your adult life when you're an elder, how it can, help ward off dementia, things like that. But thinking about young people, I think the benefits are being able to communicate and connect, right? Humanity of it all. When I think about Black students in particular, I think that's the reason why we're focusing on representation and being intentional about that, because some Black children don't think it's for them because their teachers don't look like them. The examples that they see when they watch the novellas, like they don't see themselves at all. So why, if I'm not just naturally interested, why would I want to be a part of something that I'm not invited to, right? We have to invite them to this party or have them try this thing, right? Just thinking about growing up as a person, you don't know what foods you like and you don't like. Someone has to say, here, try it. You're like, oh, that tastes good. You want to try this sport, try it. You might actually be good at it.
Right.
So that this idea, are we inviting them in to do it? Or is it just this one way, this is how I learned it, however many years ago, this is how I'm going to present it to students without trying to bring their identities into it? So I think humanity, communicating, it helps them live longer and stronger as well. But I think the work is on us as teachers to open it up for them, right? To invite them in, to let them know that it is for them and they can be successful doing it.
And Rhashida?
As we were talking, I just thought about this, and it's kind of unfortunate, but when you think about Black people from the United States, I'm wondering if it's because and young people probably get this message that we're used to being like commodified to a certain degree. So in terms of learning the language, maybe the students feel, and I'm not saying that they sit here thinking deeply like this, like, oh, well, I wonder if this is the reason. But in terms of learning the language, maybe they feel like because the culture, when it comes to, and I'm using the word broadly, when it comes to Black culture, usually it comes from what's happening in the United States, whether it be the lingo, the clothing, things of that nature. So I'm wondering if the students feel like, even if there are other Black people from other countries who speak another language, I wonder if they feel if is that necessary? Is it necessary for me to learn the other language if I'm used to things being taken from me, from my country, not the other way around? If that makes sense.
No, it certainly does. And I think that in thinking that way, and I do think there's some credence to that, it also causes Black folk in many ways to simply look at America as the center of Black culture. So I certainly see your point. And when you kind of cut yourself off, be it linguistically or otherwise, you're not recognizing that there's a whole diaspora out there. There's the African continent itself. So certainly I think that language allows this opportunity for young people and anyone studying language to open themselves up to the world. So I certainly get that point. And I'm sure folks that are listening, there may be some parents out there that are looking for ways to get their children interested in language. Do you have any recommendations for families to kind of ignite that passion, that love of learning other languages and so forth? Any recommendations for families? And either one of you, please. What do you think?
So just off the top of my head, if you just want to like start with like a soft start, nowadays there are different apps. So just to start off, you know, I'm not saying you have to jump into like a 10-week course,
Right.
but I think to start off, because there are these apps like Duolingo and even if you just wanted to do a trial lesson on a particular language,
Right.
it's an app. It's called iTalki, but it's one-on-one. It can be one-on-one, like you're actually speaking with a live person.
Okay.
I think those are sort of, and it's like a small fee. Sometimes I guess it depends on the language. But to start off, it could be like $5 for an hour or whatever. But don't quote me on the prices. It might vary.
Right.
But I think those are ways that you can sort of get started, you know, at low stakes with these
Gotcha.
apps that are out here. I don't think this stuff wasn't really available back even like a few years ago. So I would recommend that, you know, maybe people give things a try by either, or even looking at your public library. Like sometimes I teach courses at the local library for free for the participants.
Mhm.
So there are resources out there, and it's low stakes. You don't have to worry about, can I pass this course,
Right.
or how much is it going to be really expensive? I think there are some resources out there, and that would be a way to just get started. And then eventually it might ignite some interest in studying abroad. And then there are these programs of study abroad where you can maybe volunteer and learn the language. Or if you go to a particular school, maybe you might decide, you know what, I'm going to do a study abroad with my school for a semester or what have you, or a couple of weeks. So I think you can start off with like the apps, and then eventually that might ignite interest. And I would also say with the sort of apps when it comes to movies and things, maybe even just looking at movies on, if you have Netflix or whatever, or going on YouTube, like Google things where you can maybe just get used to hearing a different language so that eventually it won't sound so, and I'll put this in quotes, foreign to you.
Right. And
I
April, any
agree.
suggestions?
Yes. No, I agree with that. Directly connected to what Rhashida was saying. I always tell my students, change the language to whatever show you're watching. Like these the streaming platforms, and this, go to the settings, change the language, and also if it has subtitles, change that as well, because that's putting the words and the sounds into your mind. I'm thinking about family routines. Maybe families can do things together, maybe pick up on a few phrases. Good morning, how are you? And now you all greet each other in the language by saying good morning, how are you? If you pick up some food vocabulary, you can say that if you share meals together. Also thinking about traditions and things that you all do as a family. If there are religious families out there, sometimes the facility will have a service in multiple languages. Go to one that's in a different language, right? Because if you know the routine of the religion, like the things are the same, maybe the chants and the songs and what you say is the same, but now you're hearing it in the language that you as a child or you as a family are trying to study.
Oh, no, that's excellent. And that's great advice. Thanks to both of you. And unfortunately, you know, as always, we have these great shows, we have these great guests, and the time goes by so quickly. I would like to invite you guys back for another segment. Would you be open to do that?
Yes, of course.
Awesome.
I second.
Because I want to get more into your specific workshops and the work that you do. And I think this was a great introduction. So, another episode of Into the Afroverse with your host, William Jones. And Into the Afroverse is where we're taking Black folks into the future. Once again, I'd like to thank my two guests, April Broussard and Rhashida Hilliard. And a special shout out to Mr. Duke Productions for producing today's episode. And with that, thank you and have a good day. Take care.